Hello.
Hello, I'm Katie, and
I'm Ayn. I am a big fan of Katie, my long lost sister slash maybe lover in another life.
yeah, absolutely. And that actually fits perfectly in with our theme today, which is psychology.
mm, More like armchair psychology. So reading and learning about psychological theories without actually having any educational background in it.
Hey, that's where I'm at too. So I'm here to listen to Ain's beliefs and learnings about the shadow self.
Yes, yes. Well, so first of all, I would just like to say, um, President-elect Biden, if you're out there listening to this, I think that one of the first changes we should make in our country is to get rid of like some of these bullshit curriculum topics that we have in elementary school and middle school and high school, like, some of like microeconomics that like, honestly, none of us use that shit in our lives.
I don't think we should have
And replace
school.
it, huh?
I don't think we should have school. I think we need to abolish the entire school system
Go
because it's
back to the
really
guild
flawed.
system. Yeah.
It's so biased. I think everyone should like hang out and do some gardening for like a year.
Yes. So like Montessori schools, right?
Yes.
Yes. I know. I went down like a rabbit hole one of these days, like a few years ago about Montessori schools, because like Joanna Newsom, who I was like obsessed with at the time, went to one of those. And they just like nurture you to like find your art and yeah, like express yourself, which is so different from like the shitty public schools that I went to.
Not to be mean to public schools.
Yes, no, I got pretty lucky in public schools. But to back to my original thought, we should get rid of some of this stuff that we don't use and replace it with a class in psychology. We should be learning about this very young, so that we can have these like foundational concepts and principles upon which we can treat our own mental health throughout life.
Amen. So, if you were to start a psychology class on Jung, what would you say? How would you explain to people who don't know about the shadow self or these theories what's going on?
Yes. So the thing I love about Jung is that he really embraced the concept of embracing the darker aspects of yourself, right? Which is something that I think we in kind of like modern times have a hard time with in general. We, especially, I feel like in America, I can't speak much for living in other countries, but in America, you're really raised to project this ideal image of yourself, especially with social media and everything, like that's even heightened more, the impulse to do that. And so I think Jung talks a lot about sort of, to kind of put it dramatically, the evil within, the like the parts of ourself that we've been repressing and locking away in this box for as long as we've been conscious, really. And he thinks that the entire purpose of life, that as I grow older, I tend to concur with him, is that it's to individuate, right? And to become like this whole, like a whole person who
Right.
knows themselves on a level that's very deep, but also very like honest and real. And
I
how you do that is by like learning about your shadow self and doing like that, integration work.
I think it's so important because usually growing up means adopting like society's viewpoints and biases, but really growing up means growing into yourself. So, like when you were a child,
Yes.
what were the things you were interested in? What did you like the most? What drew your attention? And that's going to give you a much better idea of what your self conception is going to be much later in life than anything else. At least that's what I've found.
So true. And like, I don't, in my personal experience too, it's like when I started tapping into some of those kind of like older traumas or like, shame sources or vulnerabilities that I had been locking away because I was like, I'm not that person, like I'm this person. But when I was started being honest with myself, that's when I actually started feeling like the power of myself, like the courage to be myself and tapping into like those real feelings of like, this is who I am and this is what I want to do. And I think like you're a creative person, like when you're not afraid to confront those sides of yourself, that's where like a lot of those creative juices start coming out, and you start getting these unique inspirations that aren't just like kind of tropish.
I think it's so interesting too. I mean, I haven't done a lot of reading on this myself, but I think, I mean, there's an argument about the universality of morals, right? So like, or is a moral system based on a society and what its particular views are? Because things that might be moral in this country would be deemed immoral in another country, and vice versa. And so, how do we determine our shadow selves in terms of, well, maybe this is something that would be deemed like a negative characteristic for a woman or for a man in this culture or that culture, when really it just might be just an aspect of who you are without any kind of like positive or negative association generally. And I think that might be kind of interesting.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to that very classic, I guess it's like the saying, you know, that you can't have good without evil, and like you can't have order without chaos.
Right.
Like they both live adjacent to each other, and they feed off of each other. And you wouldn't even want a world that was all like order and good, right? Like it would be so stale and so boring. But then at the same time, it's also kind of your obligation as like a human being, you know, within yourself, but also as like a citizen in society, to like give order to chaos, right? Because you don't want a totally chaotic world either. But like to find that perfect balance is like something that I'm really like working on and very like interested in, and thinking about how that applies to my daily life like every day. But
I think it's also like it's dependent on like what you're doing and your personal context too. Like now that I am an artist and no longer working at a law firm with you, like my day-to-day experience is very different from how it used to be, and I'm able to explore like certain parts of like what I'm doing that otherwise I might not have in the past, or like even just having more time to explore during the day without, you know, now my 9 to 5 is design school, but having a 9 to 5 that was law was like very different. And I think being able to come to terms with like who I am as a person has been pretty interesting, honestly.
No, that's awesome. That's one of the things, I think that's why that's one of the reasons why we connected so quickly at work, was that I feel like we just like looked at each other across the office. We're just like chaotic energy, but like good chaotic energy. I like it.
And we also nerded out so much over stuff like this, like psychology and anthropology and philosophy. And I think having some of those like not soft sciences, but like, you know, those humanity conversations is important. I think that's another way I'd reorganize the school system, is instead of prioritizing things like STEM, which are important, we need to not do that by denigrating the other schools of thought, which are equally important.
Absolutely. And it's not that anyone is better than the other, but you know, I think history has proven that like the philosophical sciences or the soft sciences or even art, you know, they can act as oracles of sort, or like visionaries of what will come, like as inspiration for scientific theories, you know, to like parse out and like prove. But I think
love science fiction. I think science fiction doesn't have that.
Yeah. So that's why I'm really glad that you went to art school and did all that, because I have this theory that you know, people who don't suss out their shadow self, or like their the more difficult aspects of their being, like those are the people who have like really intense midlife crises, right?
I mean,
you know, that's why they go like buy a Ferrari, like do an affair, and like do all this crazy shit, but it's like when they're like 60, not when they're 20.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I feel like I'm in my midlife crisis now.
Exactly.
Because I'm 24, and that's okay, you know?
Exactly, right. That just means that like your peaceful retirement, you know, mentally speaking, is gonna start way younger, when you're like 40, and then like you're gonna have 60 years of just pure bliss. So
wow, what an incredible image to leave this off on. So thank you for having this conversation and talking to me. I haven't talked to you in like a century, so it's nice to catch up and just talk about life and like the shadow life and the shadow self.
It was really wonderful to have an occasion to put on our little fur coats here.
Very fancy. So we are the Spice Girls signing out.